I think I know a lot of you here, but the point is, I have to confess, I always say when I've been asked to address a Probus meeting, I never knew what Probus was. I always thought it was a bus company. Seriously, for many years I thought it was a bus company, but there you go. Life in politics. Well, my life before politics. For many, many years I was involved in tourism in the Southern Highlands and as regional manager for New South Wales Tourism. And I was lucky enough to tell people where to go. Nicely. Now they tell me, not so nicely, where to go. And that's politics. But let me start. 1952 I came to Australia to a place called Hopewood in Bowral. Anybody know Hopewood in Bowral? That used to be Hopewood. Home for Dr. Bernarda's children. We came out straight from Holland to Bowral. We stopped at Fremantle, we stayed at Fremantle and then caught the train into Bowral. It was a place on Hopewood Farm. We had 4 of us, 4 children, and Mum and Dad made 6. And I went to school at Bowral Public School and Bowral High School. I well remember my bus trips to school, and it took me 50 years to finally catch up with the people who used to torment me because I could understand English, but I couldn't speak it. And so I remembered a lot of those things, and then they asked me to a reunion. Well, didn't I have fun at that reunion with some of those people who used to torment me? But that's another story. So from there I became, I was working at the Wingecarribee Shire Council. I had Ranelagh House, you might recall Ranelagh House, for 26 years. Kay Jones and myself had Ranelagh for 26 years. During that time I was involved with Wingecarribee Shire Council for 5 years, and I did a lot in the Highlands on that regard, trying to stop quarries and trying to stop other things that people don't always want in their areas. But in 1993, somebody came and asked me from here, came to Ranelagh and said, would I consider standing for politics? And I said, no. And they said, would you like to consider it? And I thought, okay, I'll consider it. Cut a long story short, I stood for pre-selection in 1993 and I lost by 1 vote. And Bill Eddy at the time, you might recall, some people might know Bill Eddy, he won the pre-selection and took the Liberal Party to the polls, and Peter Knott won the election. So you all know Peter Knott. They came because Bill lost the election, and in 1996 they came and asked me would I stand again for pre-selection. Well, let me tell you, pre-selection is worse than divorce, and I've been through both. It really is. People don't understand what a pre-selection actually is. But anyway, yes, I stood again for pre-selection, and would you believe I lost again by 1 vote to Bill Eddy. First time in history, the Liberal Party didn't accept the pre-selection that was announced. And to cut a long story short, they asked me to stand again, and that time I won the pre-selection. I had a 10% recognition factor here in the Shoalhaven. 10%. Not much, not much. So we formed a team of locals and we door knocked for 12 months. The whole seat of Gilmore. Day 1 to day end, we door knocked. There are times when we're in places we turn around and say, where are we? Had no idea which town we were in or where we were. But I had to convince 1 person in 100 to vote for me. 1 person in 100 I had to convince. So we had a big team, 12 months of door knocking, and people say, well, why did you decide to stand? Why did I decide to stand? I keep asking that question. And the question I keep coming back to is, I have a sense of fair play. It's my Achilles heel. It always has been, and I think I wear it on my sleeve. But to have a sense of fair play means that you want things to be fair. And there's not many people these days, I think this generation, our generation, still think of fair play, do we not? Yes. I think it's extremely important in life. So that's one of the reasons, and the fact that I love community, and the fact that I used to speak up. And if you're going to speak up, put your money where your mouth is. So I did. It was a huge learning process, huge learning process. My mentor and my campaign manager was a member of the Labor Party. And a lot of you might remember Col McPhedran. If anybody from this area would know, he wrote a book called White Butterflies. He was the one that walked from Burma to India and lost all his family on the way. Anyway, he was my mentor. and he would say to me, always stay calm and look at the other side of things, and this is what I try to do. But anyway, it's, for me, I left school at 15, and it was very difficult to comprehend policies. And that was my great difficulty being in politics. It was to read the policies. I don't often admit it because you don't like admitting that you don't understand things. If you tell me how to do something, I can go and do it straight away. But read about it and work it out, I'm hopeless, and I still am. So I had to have a very good team behind me. So my immediate advisor was always somebody who could read policies and relate them then to me, and would ask me questions on it, and I would then return the answers as it should be. I went from the backbench to the Speaker's chair. I wasn't Bronnie Bishop. But I have to say that Bronnie was a great mentor of mine. I'll be quite honest about that. She taught me heaps about life and about politics. So from the Speaker's chair, I was there for 2 terms, which is 6 years. And from there, I then became the whip. Now, whip. What's a whip?
It's a complete charge.
No, not quite. It's somebody who is basically a bit like a school captain. You round up all your troops and you make sure that they're on time for their speeches, that they're where they should be, that they're dressed accordingly. And I'll never forget the time. There was one particular, and I'll tell you who it was. I better not. He was in the news for a long, long time, and he was a speaker. I'll let you guess.
Yeah.
Notoriously late for every speech he had to do. So one day I walked into his room, and I could hear the shower running, and in I go. You can't come in here. And I said, Peter, I said, you're late again. You've got 2 minutes to get to the house. You can't come in here. And I said, what have you got that I haven't seen before? He was never late again. But there's some of the things that a whip does. And I quite enjoyed being a whip because you also become, I guess, people come and talk to you about their problems and so forth. And of course, you try to assist in those situations. From the whip, I went to, domestic tourism. I wasn't in the ministry, so I became the alternate domestic tourism. And tourism, of course, was my love. From there, I took my people from the office. Some of you might know Wally Stike, who came with me. We took 3 months caravan trip around Australia. He and I in a caravan, it was just a normal caravan, no toilets, no showers, and we stopped in every caravan park along the way. It was fascinating. The things that I learnt and the things that people do and the people that you meet was fantastic, and I learned a hell of a lot about tourism and how far behind New South Wales was compared to some of the other places. And ABC actually followed us around and did a story on it as well, which is really great to see. So I guess some of my highlights I wanted to go was when I was whip, the government of the day went to war with a coalition of the willing. You might recall the war in Iraq. I guess for me that was the hardest decision to make. Coming from war-torn Holland, I was born in 1944, which is the tail end of the war, and I had to decide how I was going to get everybody united behind the Prime Minister. There was about 10 of us that weren't very happy about that, and I had to sit with one particular person for about 3 days to make sure that she would go behind the Prime Minister, because he wanted everybody to be united, as you can imagine. You might have had 5 minutes of glory. If you decided to oppose it, you could cross the floor, you have 5 minutes of glory, but it wouldn't make any difference. The government was going to go because even the opposition had agreed. Cut a long story short, the Prime Minister came into me and said, how's it going? I said, well, you've got to do something for this lady who's really concerned. He said, okay, what does she need? I said, she wants more aid to go to the Iraq once the war is finished. And he said, yes, we'll do that. So when it was announced in the House, he turned around and he said to her, and instead of giving $4 billion, we're giving 40 billion or 40 million, whatever it was, for aid in Iraq, which turned her then to support him. To cut a long story short, he rewarded me in a way, although I didn't expect a reward because it took a long time for me to make up my mind too. He allowed me, as the only politician from the parliament to go to the first election in Iraq and witness the election, which is basically what we fought for. And I went to Iraq and Iran. In fact, I love the Middle East, and I've been there quite a few times. But I was really concerned when I got there, nothing was happening. And if you'd have seen the streets, they were loaded with armoured tanks, soldiers with shotguns. It was a real frightening place to be. By lunchtime, hardly anybody had come in to vote. After lunch, they all started to arrive because they all had to walk. They were all dressed in their Sunday best. They all knew, without exception, who to vote for. Nobody had a piece of paper. And there was numbers, I think there was 120 people who were standing, but everybody knew who they were voting for. And of course, they put their finger in the inkwell. That was how they signed their papers, if you like. So you knew people who had voted and who hadn't, because everybody had black lips where they had all the ink all over them. But for me, it was a real lesson. Ask the people why they voted. It was the first time for them that they could vote without a shotgun at their heads, basically. So it was quite an emotional exercise to see so many people come out and vote at that election. I was also able to go to the Christian Parliamentary Fellowship in the United States, and that was where I met Hillary Clinton. George Bush was president at the time, and I met Hillary Clinton, and I also met Obama. Obama was just a senator, and so was Hillary Clinton. And I have to say, from that meeting, I was really impressed with Hillary Clinton. Obama, I didn't get to know all that well, but I got to know him later on when I was at the UN, when the elections were being held. But I want to talk to you about the Parliamentary Fellowship that I enjoyed so much over there. And I was sent by the Parliamentary Fellowship from Australia. There was about 6,000 people at this gathering. And after the main event, all the women went to one section. And all the women sat around tables of 10. And we had to go around each table that we could. I have to say to you, I've never been so moved as to see women from other countries sitting together and apologising for the wars around their country that the men were going to and participating on. The women were apologising to other women from other countries and saying how sorry they were that all this was happening. You have to see something like that to believe it. It certainly changed my mind about a lot of things. So that was my American trip. Back in Parliament, most people are there for the right reason. I know there's been a lot of hoo-ha about expenses and so forth, and I can go into that if you wish me to, but most people go in there for the right reason. It's a case of you do what you can. It's a different society. I can understand why people don't want to leave Parliament, because it is a totally different world. You have everything at your fingertips. But it is a life that leads you away from your family and your friends. In fact, I could count friends on one hand, I guess, who I could really call as friends, because you do lose contact and you can't talk to them as much. What sticks out most for me is the loneliness. It's a very lonely place to be in Parliament. I can remember John Howard used to allow conscience votes. We don't get conscience votes these days, have you noticed? And with conscience votes, you can really vote without fear or favour how you really feel about something. And the one conscience vote that always sticks in my mind was, for the women who will know this, the RU486 pill, which was the abortion pill. And our government really wanted us to vote against it. I actually went to the other side and voted for it, simply because I know I had a daughter, and if she had been, I had two daughters, but if she'd have been raped or something, I would have wanted her to be able to have that pill. And not only that, it's another story, she couldn't have anaesthetic and so forth. So I was very conscious of that. But the other thing that convinced me, and I was sitting next to Jenny George from the other side and Peter Garrett. Remember Peter Garrett? And they took photos of me sitting in between them as I lived between the two Labours. But the point was that, to my mind, and I'm just going to justify that, and I'll put it plainly and simply as I usually do, no man was going to tell me what to do with my body. Sorry, guys. I mean, you naturally, women would talk about it with their husbands or whatever they wanted to do, but there's always circumstances. So that was that. The other change that I had a bit of influence in was the cloning and stem cell. You might recall when that came up, it was a one bill. One bill. You had cloning and you had stem cell research. I managed to split that bill because I didn't believe in cloning, but I did believe in stem cell research. So every time I see that coming up, I feel rather pleased that that actually happened. You're always competing with your colleagues. And one example I'd like to give you is the metro over the country and Manildra and the ethanol was one particular incident. My colleagues in Sydney couldn't give a damn about ethanol. Me, with 300, 400 workers, was extremely concerned about ethanol. So they're the sort of things that you even fight within your own party. You know, you have to decide which way you're going to go on that. I'll just tell you another funny story. Dick Honan, who is the owner of Manildra, I don't know if some of you know him or not, he used to come and visit me in Parliament House, and one night he came running in, it must have been 10:30. Joe, I said, what? Have you got any money? He used to pictures, man asking me if I got any money. I said, yeah, why? He said, I haven't got a taxi fare, can you lend me some? He's never paid me back either. That's how you make money, isn't it? So there's some of the things. When I first became the speaker, it was my very first term. It's an assistant, not the speaker, it's assistant speaker. There's a team of 5 of us, and we take turns in being speaker when the real speaker doesn't get to be there. And it was my turn, and I can remember sitting there, and I thought, gee, not quite sure about this. Anyway, somebody started to speak, and I started to say, your time has expired. And I said to the guy at the side, what do I do now? He said, tell him to sit down. But on the other hand, once I had to speak, and you have a time limit, and most times it's 20 minutes. It's a long time to speak for 20 minutes on one subject. So I did my bit, and I sat down after 10. And I remember the speaker saying, just looking, and he was new as a speaker, looking at his age and said, what do I do now? And the guy said, turn your mic off. But what I had done, I had given the opposition 10 minutes of my time, which is an absolute no-no, which I didn't know at the time. So Michael asked me, did I know much about politics? I have to say I didn't. I really didn't even know how the Senate worked. Truly, I didn't know how the Senate worked. But I knew once I had to be there, things changed, and things always do change. And I always say to budding politicians, don't go into it unless your family is supporting. You need your family support. And I can always remember Howard saying, when we first had our first meeting in the party room, always ring home at least twice a day. Because when you're sick, the only people who will look after you is your family. And how true that is, because nobody cares unless it's your family about what happens out there. Balancing Parliament House with your community at home is a difficult situation because you're going from, as I said, an unreal world into something that's really grounds you. Who's going to fix your pothole compared to are you going to vote to go to war? You know, can you see the differences on the local level as opposed to a federal level? During my time, women would meet together from all parties to discuss the issues of the day. It doesn't happen anymore. It's dog eat dog in your own party as well, and I hate to say that. We don't have time to discuss things, or we don't make the time. We're always trying to point score, and I hate seeing that. But when we would meet, the Labor Party, the Greens, those days Democrats, we all met, and you'd be surprised how little difference there is amongst the women in politics. It's just the fact that we're in different parties and we vote different ways. And this is one of the reasons I hope, against hope, that in America we get a female president. It would make, sorry guys, I say this with all honesty, because I know how different women actually think about things and yet can still make those hard decisions. and you do have to make hard decisions. Men support each other very well in Parliament. Notice how they closed ranks after the expenses debate? Both sides closed ranks. They got rid of the female, and never mind who else had done it, she's gone. So, but women don't always support each other in Parliament or even in politics, which I find is a shame. I guess the highlight of my trip was my 3 months at the United Nations. And I had 3 months there, and I went each Sunday to St John of God to do the soup kitchen. And that's where I really learnt about people. We think we have it tough here. Go and see how some of the people live over there. There's no such thing as welfare. You get welfare for 2 years and that's it. Then you're on your own. I used to be there just after breakfast, and I'd do lunch, and I'd prepare for dinner, and you'd have everything from 600 to 800 people go through in the soup kitchen. And I would have been the only Australian working there in that soup kitchen, and I just learnt so much, and how little we actually need to survive, and how much we actually have that we don't need. So I also there again met, I was there when Obama's election was on, and that was a real thrill for me to see an election in America. You can only vote in your block. You can't vote as we do. You can go to any place and vote, as you know. You can vote for the person. In America, you can only vote in that block. And people were queued for miles and miles to go and cast their vote for Obama. And I've never seen anything like it. It's just all the Negro Americans came out and voted, which they hadn't done before in the past. And it was, well, as you know, it was a huge windfall for him. I also remember, what was her name? Palin. Sarah Palin? Yeah. I was rather impressed with her simply because she had the guts. And she didn't know much, but she had guts to have a go. And when I came home off the plane, I had bought a Sarah Palin outfit. And my sister was at the plane, and I had my hairdo up and my glasses. And she was looking for me. And I said, "Sis, I can see America over there." She knew who it was. But it was just the fun and games. But she was quite a powerful woman at the time. I don't know what she's doing at the moment. One of the things that was a highlight for me was being able from Main Road 92. Have you travelled over Main Road 92? Yes. It's almost finished. The bridge is almost done. That was one of the things, the first things. And I can remember being asked after I'd won the pre-selection and the election, and the pre-selection, and the TV guy came up to me and said, "What's the one thing you're going to do, Joe?" And if you know it, Graham French used to be over there, standing behind me. "She's going to do Main Road 92. So I had to stick with doing Main Road 92. And that's how it basically happened, but it's one of the things that really has progressed this area. I guess the university was the next thing we did, because the Shoalhaven campus of the Wollongong University was something we did. The medical school, the nurses' school, and the list goes on. They're the things of infrastructure that we wanted to do. I mean, I didn't get to fix all the mental health issues and all those types of things, but if we didn't have the infrastructure in place, then none of those services would be here. And that was the most important things for me. I've had 3 boundary changes in my period of 17 years. I used to have the Highlands when I first started, then went to Bateman's Bay. I had that in the electorate. And the last election I thought I was going to lose, definitely thought I was going to lose, because I picked up 1/3 of the seat of Throsby, which is the safest Labor seat in the country. But we still managed to win at that occasion as well. Why did I decide to go? 17 years was a long time. I was losing my mojo, if you like, in regards to politics. I didn't like some of the things that I saw. And so I decided to give it a miss, and I thought it was a good time to go when I thought that the government was going to, the Liberal Party was going to win government and give somebody else a go. So that's why my concern for politics in the future is that people are loath to make hard decisions. And I hate to think that we're going to get a government that's going to make a decision on popularity. And that is not good for Australia. Most of them do. Most of them do. And I guess that's one of the reasons when I heard that the council, the local council, was thinking of putting in a political team, Liberal Party team, and also a Labor Party team. And I did say then that's something that I was dead against. I think we have enough politics in state and federal, that really local council should be just that, local. So I looked around for a team of people who are community-minded people. I think there's one other girl who's in the Liberal Party. The rest, I don't even know how they vote. I don't care how they vote, as long as they have their conscience with the local community. That's what we're after here. And I think it's so important that we do that. Sure, I get flack. Team Gash. I set out to have a team. It's no secret. I deliberately did it so that we could get things done for the area. But the people are not political people. They're people picked from the community. And that's the way I think it should be. Who have we met? Michael was asking, where's Michael over there? Asking me, well, who have you met? I sat, I suppose where you're sitting, Jeff, with the Queen in Parliament House. She came to Australia, and I have to say I've never seen a more elegant lady. She just stood up and spoke without notes. She was just, yeah, a joy to behold. George Bush, I've met. The Dalai Lama, I've met a couple of times. The Gorbachev, I've met a couple of times. Hillary Clinton, and I know I got a bit of flack from my own party, but I think she's a great lady. And quite frankly, I hope she wins the next election. But that's just my opinion. Obama, yep, I met him. And the other thing Michael asked me, have I ever missed the bells? Missed the division? Once. Only once in the 17 years. Have I ever been thrown out? Once. By Anna Burke. She was going on and on and on, and I said, you sound like a fishwife. For me, politics certainly changed my life. From a new Australian immigrating to a sole parent with two children, not being able to speak English, this country has been damn good to me. And this community is why I give back. And just as another aside, in the last 3 months, I have naturalised, I'm licensed to still naturalise people, over 80 people from different countries here in the Shoalhaven. So, you know, Zimbabwe, Budapest, places that you've never heard of, well, we've heard of, but you wouldn't expect to come here and live in the Shoalhaven. So we are becoming a changing nation and a changing world. But the other thing, and I'm going to do this because I'm sure you're going to ask me, so I'll get it up front. I visited every detention camp while I was in Parliament, and the first one I visited was Villawood. And I looked at the gate when they took me in, and there was all the barbed wire and everything else, and I thought, I can't go in here. I can't do this. Cut a long story short, once we got in the gate, and I saw the lawns, I saw kids playing, I saw the facilities, and I went on the radio the next day and said, my pensioners don't have it as good as they did at Villawood. So, and I've seen the places that they've destroyed. As I said, I've been to every detention centre in Australia. And I'll say the same again. They are looked after very well. In Villawood, they have one section, and I said, why is the prams and blankets and things all on this barbed wire? That's the TV view. That's where the TV cameras take their pictures of refugees trying to escape over the wall. I cannot tell you how hard we try. I've been on a custom boat with the boys that go out and patrol the seas, some as young as 20, and they are affected already because they've been accused of not saving the people and saving themselves first. Because people try to drag them out of the boat so they can get over into the boat. And as they said to me, Jo, we can't save anybody if we don't save ourselves first. So I feel for those guys, men and women, as to the job that they do. I know there's many out there that say we don't do enough, and I see the only way of being able to do more is perhaps to increase the intake of refugees refugees who come in the right way, not try to beat the system or try to have economic refugees, which does happen. Because some of those people who I saw in those camps were complaining they hadn't been to the dentist yet. They wanted their teeth fixed. They had gold bracelets, gold necklaces. They weren't poor. They weren't poor. And they just jumped the queue, as I said, with dentists, with doctors, with hospital treatment, where I knew of many people in my electorate here who had to wait and couldn't get served in those issues. So I'll just put that out there because I've been accused of a lot of things, but that's how I feel about the refugees. So I was pretty strong on that particular issue. Over to you. Questions?
Yeah, I have one.
And then the lady.
Sorry.
Now go on.
About Pauline Hanson. Beasley went to Howard and said, what are we going to do about it? Well, she get into power for it. What's your handle on that one?
Interesting. Pauline Hanson came to me and asked, would I join her party? And I said, you've got to be joking. Because I lost a number of people from the Liberal Party because I went to headquarters and said, I want One Nation last on my ticket. And they said, you can't do that. And I said, well, I'm doing it. I want her last on my ticket. Pauline said to me, fine, I'll come in every time to your electorate and I'll target your electorate. I said, do it. And she did. She went to Robertson in the Highlands because I had Robertson at the time. She came to Nowra 3 times, in case you can't remember. She went to Ulladulla, she went to Kiama. And the vote for One Nation in Orient Point, Greenwell Point, Currarong, and some of those other locations was 28 to 30%. So for me, 1998 was a very difficult election. But I knew that what she was saying, and I actually felt sorry for her because we chucked her out of the Liberal Party, you might recall. So when it was time, I was the first one to speak in Parliament for the maiden speech for the females, and she was the last. So I went into the House and I sat next to her. And the staff in my office were thinking, don't shake your head, Jo. Don't say anything, Jo, because of the things that she was saying. So every time you see Pauline Hanson on TV, you'll see JoannaGash sitting next to her, not saying a word. But it was a difficult one. But I had made up my mind that what she was saying, even though I agreed with some of it, was very bigoted. I couldn't support it.
Jo, in the past, we've got some time left. In the past, I've heard you speak about your time at the United Nations and your observations of how they work and how different countries relate to one another. Have you got 5 minutes that you can perhaps tell us a little bit about that time?
You happy? Let me do that?
Yeah.
Again, a lot of the countries can't speak English. So one of the highlights for me was to sit with them at lunchtimes and hear them talk in their own languages. The issues were always humanitarian, mostly humanitarian. Crisis issues, they have a crisis committee as well, nuclear armaments and those sort of things, which I was able to sit in. I spoke at the United Nations at the General Assembly with nearly every country present. That's quite to hear yourself talk, but a male voice comes out interpreting it, quite hard. But for me, I went in there saying that the United Nations is a toothless tiger. I come out saying the United Nations is a toothless tiger, but we need them. We need a watchdog on what is happening around the world. If you don't have that watchdog, then it would be a disaster in my book. So for that reason, the United Nations is important. Going to their meetings, it was interesting to see who spoke and who didn't speak. All the countries came with their entourages and all dressed in their national costume and things like that. Try and get into the United Nations when the presidents are all in town. Wow, you get searched, almost body searched, before you're allowed in. So they're the sort of things. I'm not quite sure what else you wanted me to say, but
I think you were talking about the animosities that we hear about and how those people did or didn't relate to one another.
And that still happens. It still happens, but mostly people are allowed to speak. It's hard to put into words exactly how the system works, but I think it's just a talk fest. Sorry, I still think of it as a talk fest. but it's probably a necessary talk fest that we need to have so we understand where it's all coming from. And a lot of them are self-interest at the United Nations, would you believe? It's still a lot of self-interest at those places, but we do need them to be there, and I found it fascinating to see how people reacted to things and things that are important, but the people who all speak about humanitarian issues and economy in their towns and cities are the most well-dressed, well-heeled, jewellery people speaking about poverty, yet doing nothing about it. That to me is false.